But, whenever I go into negotiating rooms, all I hear about is people talking about distrust between different countries, distrust all the way around. And I find it really shocking that we have been negotiating for 20 years now and countries still don't trust each other.
I think it has to do more with the lack of ambition and lack of commitments. So in Durban, parties did agree to a lot of things, but over a course of a year, we haven't seen those commitments really operationalized. So I think the trust is there, distrust is there, but then I think there should be some ways where parties can come together, because if they don't, chances are that we might end up having some serious repercussions for that. Right now, talks are not moving the way they should, and especially there's a lot of pressure on the negotiators because the ministers are supposed to arrive next week, and if they don't find the same trust as they had in Durban, or perhaps where they left off, I think there'll be some serious repercussions about it.
For sure, but I think one of the key issues with this trust is the developing countries and developed countries divide. But within that, there's kind of so many strategic little groups that operate semi-independently.
Yeah.
It's almost irrelevant to call it developing and developed country anymore. And can you kind of branch out that trust?
Yeah, I guess in these negotiations, it's all about numbers, right? If you see that there's no country who's negotiating on behalf of itself, it has to make alliances. It has to make groups through which they can actually push for commitments and for stances. So I think they cannot do this alone. They have to come together and negotiate as blocks.
For sure.
And I think at the end of the day, it's all about numbers. The more number you have, the bigger your wagon is, the stronger your stance is in the negotiations.
Okay, so let's start with the history of the G77 and the EU and Umbrella.
Well, that's difficult to say because I'm not really sure where the G77 started. But then I think the way these negotiations happen is that they have these blocks, and they come together as a group based on their priorities, on their economies, on the way they want these decisions. So there are like a lot of characteristics how they come together that actually play a role in how they come together. So I think G77 plus China is a group of all developing countries. So basically we see there are developed countries and developing countries on a broader division if we do of all the countries in the UNFCCC. So the developed countries has different negotiating blocks, like Eastern European countries have a different block, more developed European countries have an umbrella group which also has Australia and New Zealand in it, and on the other side we see there's a group of developing countries which is called the G77 Group of 77 developed countries, but China is not considered as a developing country because its economy has progressed to meet with those of the developed countries, but still there are a lot of issues that does not qualify China to become a developed country. So and then most of the position that China has sides with the G77 countries. So basically if we see the example of G77, we see that G77 has some interesting dynamics. They have like a range of countries in it that basically push for one agenda.
For sure, but I mean, within these different negotiating groups, there's massive differentiation.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, within the umbrella group, for example, we've got Australia, we've got Russia, we've got Ukraine, we've got the US, we've got Japan.
Yeah.
Many different ideas, geopolitically, about the economy, about many different things. And I actually, in speaking with my delegation and speaking with some of the other umbrella members, there's a lot of different ideas about how things are going and about different policies and things like that. And I think one of the really interesting thing here is once you get those subgroups of the big groups, so once you get some of the smaller groups within G77 and some of the groups that kind of cross the borders. Yeah. So do you want to talk about a little bit about the smaller groups within G77, for example?
Yeah, sure. There are other groups like Small Island Developing States, which are called SIDS and AOSIS, and there's also African Group, which have countries from the African continent. They have their own sort of positions on a lot of issues. They have different economies, different issues that they deal with. Certainly, these are the countries which are the least developed countries, which don't have the capacity financially, resource-wise, to basically, and they are the worst climate victims in the world, right? So they have their own stances, and I think SIDS and the African Group have stricter stance in the negotiations than their counterparts. So those are like small countries which have which do play an important role as well at times. And I think in Australia case, Australia sides with a lot of small island developing countries.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, well, that's when I guess regional boundaries come into place. I mean, we see with a lot of the Latin American groups, with the African group, they play on kind of their regional geography, and Australia as well. I mean, we negotiate with the big bad guys that are scattered all across the world, but generally the one common denominator is that they have big industrial economies that emit a lot of greenhouse gases. But also, we like to pretend that we're we like to say, not pretend, but we like to say that we're an Asia-Pacific country.
Yeah.
We like to engage with the Asian countries, but also we like to engage with the small island states in the South Pacific.
So do you guys bully such countries like in the negotiations?
Well, I wouldn't call it bullying, at least not publicly. But I think it's an interesting dynamic that goes on.
Yeah.
We are one of the wealthiest countries here in terms of not only our economy, but in terms of how many greenhouse gases we emit. But we also like to think that we are friends with the Pacific countries.
Mm-hmm.
However, a lot of that friendship, like I guess the friendship between the EU and the OASIS that has started, so the EU being the European Union and OASIS being the small island countries, a lot of that is based on an economic relationship whereby there's a serious power dynamic and some of the countries are really kind of the victims of economic inequalities,
Right. So it's interesting you mentioned this friendship between Australia and many small states. In Durban, we saw that they came together and they were like giving intervention, supporting each other. So do you think they actually played some sort of role in Durban negotiations where they kind of actually supported each other just to get something out of each other? Or do you think it was just because of the fact that they had their own sort of bilateral arrangements that they wanted to focus on and not so much on the UNFCCC?
Well, definitely. I mean, climate change here is not debated as a scientific thing. It's definitely a political thing. Mm-hmm. And that political aspect goes not only within the UNFCCC, but outside it. And outside the UNFCCC, we have a lot of economic relationships with Pacific countries. Mm-hmm. A large percentage of our aid money goes to Pacific countries. Okay. And a lot of those countries are quite dependent on a lot of that aid money for their own survival. So I definitely think there was some stuff going on. Also, you saw from Cancun, there was a Carahwana dialogue that was started up between Australia, the EU, and some of the small island states. And
I think many countries term that dialogue to be an important player for pushing for a successful outcome in Cancun.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that in Durban it played a significant part again.
Okay.
So the fact that you had kind of relationships between Australia, the EU and some of those developing countries really helped move towards a global deal for climate change. But I'm also slightly suspicious about these relationships, and it's very interesting to think that Australia can be in a negotiating bloc with the US, but at the same time say it's very close friends with some of the small island states who are the victims of the emissions of Australia and the US, basically.
Yeah. I think, it's interesting the way these alliances are made and broken. Like, for instance, even within G77 countries, there are like a lot of factions and a lot of disparities that we see. So even as a group, despite the fact that they give interventions in the plenaries, but at the same time we see that within the group there are so many differences that at times play against the group. Like, for instance, in Copenhagen we saw that there were some basic countries that went out of the G77 group to negotiate a different sort of outcome, which was outside the UNFCCC process. And
so those basic countries are who?
The basic countries include India, Brazil, South Africa, China, So these are the basic countries, and Russia, sorry. So they basically went out of the UNFCCC process without having the support from the G77 countries, and negotiated an external document which basically most G77 countries didn't accept. So I think, yeah, these some of them, like the alliances, are strategic, and at times they are short term, and at times they are long term as well. Like for instance, recently the like-minded group countries, which has come up as a strong group. They are giving interventions this year, and as a group. So yeah, let's see how successful they are to push for something here in Doha.
So who are some of the like-minded countries?
Again, the group is comprises of very different countries. Like we have countries from the basic group, which includes China and India. Then we have developing countries who are really vocal about the G77 stance, and who play a very important role in the G77 group, such as Philippines, Pakistan, Venezuela, Bolivia, and then we have few small island states as well. So the group comprises of very diverse sort of economies and diverse group of countries.
It has some of the OPEC countries as well,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it does. It does. But then I was just talking to someone, and someone actually compared the like-minded group with a machine gun, because he said that like a machine gun, LMG is making a lot of sound, but it's not doing anything. It's not hitting the target. So yeah, that's an interesting comparison. But I was talking to someone from the LMG group, and I mean from the group of from the country who belongs to the LMG, and he's saying that it's a force that countries here shouldn't reckon with. So maybe they have something in store in Doha, but we're not really sure what their stance is as such.
So I guess looking into next week, we should keep our eyes on the like-minded group and maybe the Carahwana dialogue or some of those aspects?
Yeah, and I think we should look into every group, every country, because so far we are not really sure what's going to happen in the second week. The state of play of things here is really slow. Nobody's really sure of what's happening in these negotiations at this point. There's a lot going on for sure, but there's sort of there's no clarity among the negotiators of what will happen in the second week. But certainly, I think when the ministerial session will start, things will pick up, and we'll see some great action happening there.
Okay.